The 2025 Black History Month theme, African Americans in Labor, focuses on the various and profound ways that work and working of all kinds, free and unfree, skilled or unskilled, vocational and voluntary, intersect with the collective experiences of Black people. Today I'm going to tell you about three special African Americans who made a big impact in Albany and beyond. There are many, many others who deserve to be included, but I chose to focus just on these three lesser-known men from a genealogical perspective. Albany and southwest Georgia are centrally located in the region where cotton grows well, known as the Cotton Belt, and also called the Black Belt for the enslaved people who grew the cotton in that region. In the 1825 Treaty of Indian Springs, the Creek Nation ceded to the United States all lands lying within the boundaries of the state of Georgia. This opened up southwest Georgia for settlement. Nelson Tift, a merchant and land speculator, founded Albany in 1836, envisioning it as a center for growing cotton and transporting it to markets via the Flint River, the Apalachicola River, and the Gulf of Mexico. Cotton planters and their enslaved African Americans populated Dougherty County when it was formed in 1853. When the Civil War ended, most of Albany's residents were freedmen and cotton planters. Between 1867 and 1868, over 2,400 African American men were registered to vote in Albany and Dougherty County. Like other cities in the South, Albany implemented Jim Crow tactics such as literacy tests and poll taxes, so that by 1915, Albany had only 28 registered Black voters. W.E.B. Du Bois published The Souls of Black Folk in 1903. Chapter 7 of the book is titled Of the Black Belt, where he talks about his visit to Dougherty County in 1898. He called Dougherty County the heart of the Black Belt, at the west end of the Black Belt, where blacks outnumbered whites 10-1. Du Bois said that West Dougherty County was perhaps the richest slave kingdom the modern world ever knew. 150 white men forced labor from almost 6,000 blacks over 90,000 acres of land. Dougherty County was once called the Egypt of the Confederacy. The 1905 photo on the right side of the slide shows that even then it was still called the Egypt of America. Albany remained the heart of the Cotton Kingdom until 1898 and was dominated by sharecropping. The three men I'll tell you about today grew up in this environment. Deal Jackson was born a slave and never received a formal education. By his death in 1913, he had amassed a fortune in land, 2,000 acres, based on his extraordinary farming skills. W.E.B. Du Bois mentions Jackson in his book, though he changed his name to Jack Delson. He wrote, "Further on lives Jack Delson, the most prosperous Negro farmer in the county. It is a joy to meet him, a great, broad-shouldered, handsome black man, intelligent and jovial. 650 acres he owns and has 11 black tenants. A neat and tidy home nestled in a flower garden, and a little store stands beside it." Most of the newspaper articles about Deal Jackson were patronizing, even though they were positive about his life and achievements. I was excited to find a 1911 Iowa State Bystander newspaper article featuring an interview with Deal Jackson, where he spoke about his life. He was born a slave in Putnam County, Georgia, around 1852. He said he was 13 years old when the Civil War ended in 1865. So far, I have not learned the identity of his enslaver. According to the 1860 U.S. Census slave schedules for Putnam County, Georgia, there were 7,138 slaves there. My Ancestry Library Edition search of the 1860 slave schedules for Putnam County found 116 8-year-old boys. There were 125 enslavers who owned 20 or more slaves, and 277 slaveholders who owned fewer than 20 slaves. Deal Jackson did not know his father's name, and he didn't tell the interview his mother's name. He said he continued working at the same plantation where he was enslaved until he was 21 years old, which would have been 1873. Yet I found him listed in Dougherty County on the July 1, 1867 U.S. Returns of Qualified Voters and Reconstruction Oath Books. Men had to be 21 years old to register to vote, which would put his date of birth by 1846 at the latest, so this conflicts with other records that place his birth date at 1852. Jackson had 4 children with his first wife, but none of them survived. I have not found a marriage record for his first marriage, and Jackson did not mention his first wife's name. On the 7th of October, 1894, he married a second time to Missy Clements. Together, they raised 2 daughters, Arlene, Bertie, and Geneva. Early in his career, the 1880 agricultural census shows him sharecropping on 700 acres of land and producing $1,822 in farm products, which would be equivalent to almost $44,000 today. A December 1919 article in the Birmingham Age Herald describes how he got started as a farmer. The first year he worked a 1-mule farm and produced 7 bales of cotton. The next year he worked a 2-horse farm and produced 24 bales of cotton and a good corn crop. By the third year he had 3 horses and produced 40 bales of cotton and a great deal of corn. After that he bought 250 acres and built a log cabin for his family and another 6 cabins for his workers. Later he was able to purchase another 250 acres and began entering and winning the annual first bale of cotton competition. A newspaper article from 1911 said that he had won the first bale competition for 13 consecutive years. I noticed on Family Search in Dougherty County probate records that in 1880 he purchased farming implements and other items from an estate sale: a plow stock, a cotton planter, a horse mule named Scott, a mattress, 67 bushels of corn, 58 bushels and 172 quarts of another grain of some sort that I couldn't make the name out. So he was a bargain hunter when it came to equipping his farm. Of 1906. He spoke on the topic, The Negro in Agriculture, along with William Boyd from Ellington, South Carolina, Alfred Smith from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and A.C. Wingate from Warrenton, Florida. He said that he had graduated 10 to 15 people from his farm who have since gone into business, and that several of them had bought farms and were doing well. Deal Jackson signed his will on 19 January 1912 and filed it at the Dougherty County Courthouse. There were no death certificates in 1913. Newspaper accounts gave conflicting dates of death: the 19th, 20th, or 21st of December 1913. One newspaper article that was repeated in other papers at the time said he died at his home of apoplexy, which is what we would now call a stroke. I am not sure where he's buried. There is an entry in Jeanette Holland's 30,638 Burials in Georgia of a D.L. Jackson who died 19 December 1913 and is buried at Story Acre Cemetery in Lee County. Deal Jackson was nationally famous for his success as an African-American farmer. The Library of Congress's Chronicling America historic newspaper project returns 236 matches in a phrase search for Deal Jackson. Jackson's daughter, Arlene Bertie, died in 1933 in Albany, Georgia, and his daughter Geneva died in 1936 in West Palm Beach, Florida. Jackson's second wife, Missy, died intestate in the early fall of 1938, and the letters of administration for her estate were filed on the 5th of September 1938. Bartow F. Powell is the second African-American worker we'll discuss today. He was born on the 3rd of August, 1865 in Bainbridge, Decatur County, Georgia. He was listed on the 1870 and 1880 census as living with his parents, Benjamin and Sarah. In the 1880 census, he was listed working as a farmhand. The census also shows that he did attend school in 1880 and was able to read and write. Powell had a remarkable career both as an engineer who worked to improve the Flint River and as a very prosperous farmer. Ancestry Library Edition has a database called U.S. Register of Civil, Military, and Naval Service 1863 to 1959. I found 9 records of his job title and pay in that database. 1883 is the first year where I found a record of Bartow F. Powell working in the Engineer-at-Large section of the War Department, which is what we would now call the Corps of Engineers. He gained more experience and was promoted to sub-overseer than to snagboat watchman. The work of snagboats was very important for Albany's economy. The Flint River was used to transport goods, particularly cotton, down the Apalachicola River and then to the Gulf of Mexico. The goal of the Engineer-at-Large Department was to keep the bottom of the Flint River dredged and free of snags. A snag is a submerged object, typically a tree, which has the potential to snag or catch vessels as they pass over them. Trees in the river usually settled upright because the heavy trunk would be lower in the water than the upper part of the tree. A snag could rip a hole in the bottom of a boat and sink it. Snag boats were about 190 feet long and 95 feet wide and carried a crew of 45 men. The position of the snag in the water could be seen by a V-shaped break that it would cause in the surface of the water. A snag submerged even as deep as 30 or 40 feet causes a boil in the overhead surface water, which is easily recognizable by lookouts like Bartow F. Powell on the snag boats. The snag boats are double-bowed catamaran-type vessels with a steel butting beam that was 15 feet long and 10 feet wide connecting the bows. When a snag was sighted, the boat was maneuvered close to the point where the V-shaped break appeared on the water surface so that the crew could lower a huge sweep chain operated by 4 engine-driven capstans, each of which could pull 35 tons. The chain would engage the snag and raise its free end out of the water. Windlass chains were then used to haul the snag onto the beam. Then a special engine was used to run an enormous drum which releases or winds up a huge chain that could resist a strain of 75 tons. If the boat had trouble loosening the snag with chains, it would back away from the obstruction about 60 feet and then under full steam smash into the snag with its steel butting beam and 800 tons of total weight. The snag boat would repeatedly smash into the snag until it gave way. The impact frequently caused all members of the crew to sprawl headlong on the deck and fire doors under the boilers to be knocked open. When the snag was freed, the windlass chains were used to haul it up over the beam so that the engine-driven saws could cut the tree or obstruction up into sections about 20 to 25 feet long. There were people who would buy these sections and sell them to sawmills if the wood was still good. If the sections were not good enough to sell, they were hauled on the snag boats to deep sections of the river, and there they were dumped overboard where they would sink in the sand and do no more damage. Working on a snag boat was very dangerous. Sometimes men would be killed or injured as a result of slipping or breaking of chains or the sudden collapse of snags when they were pulled from their mud beds. Later on, Powell was promoted to the position of foreman. In researching Bartow Powell, I found a news article from 17 October 1891 in the Weekly News and Advertiser showing widespread recognition of Powell's work. The article tells about a visit by the U.S. Assistant Chief Engineer Thomas Robertson, who wanted to speak to Bartow Powell and Captain Rouse of the steamer City of Albany regarding improvements to be made to the Flint River. Bartow was in charge of the work, supervising 20 hands and a large, well-equipped boat, and had 20 years' experience in this line. The goal was to make landing easier and safer at the wharf. Robertson ordered Powell and Rouse to go downriver and remove obstacles. The newspaper was confident that the work would be promptly and effectually done. The newspaper said, This he accomplished with the construction of wings on either side of the river, forcing current in the channel of the river, thus making it deeper. In addition to his full-time work as a river engineer, Powell also worked full-time as a farmer. I found an 1885 deed showing his purchase of an 80-acre farm from the estate of D.E. Calder. I found another deed showing the 1895 purchase of Dr. P.L. Hillsman's 400-acre farm, which was located 5 miles west of Albany. In 1897, he cleared $7,000 on his 1896 crop. In 1915, newspapers all over the country reported that he had sold 500 bales of cotton at 8 cents a pound, with the total sale amounting to more than $20,000. Bartow F. Powell married Charlotte White on 23 January 1890. The 1900 and 1910 census shows him living in Baker County with Charlotte and their growing family of 8 children. I found him listed in the 1912 Albany City Directory, living on a lot at 307 South Street. The 1911 Sanborn Fire Insurance map shows the lot and its buildings, which I've highlighted with a blue box on the right side of the image on the slide. On 22 January 1918, the Albany Herald published a notice about Bartow Powell. It said, "Bartow F. Powell, the well-known colored farmer and merchant, who has large holdings in this county and Baker County, is seriously ill at his home in this city. Reports from his bedside today were that there is little encouragement in his condition." His death announcement appeared the next day, stating, "At his home in Albany, Bartow Powell, probably the wealthiest colored man in Georgia, died the 23rd instant." Powell ran between 200 and 300 plows on his own plantations in Baker County, and he also possessed much property in Dougherty County. The deceased is survived by his wife and several children. I have heard an oral history account that Powell's death was the result of an attack by a white man who was jealous of his success. I have not found any documentary records to support that, but it's easy to imagine how that could have been covered up in those days. Bartow died without a will, and I found 5 court records relating to the administration of his estate, which was wrapped up by August 1920. After Bartow's death, Charlotte and their children, Bartow Jr., Lillian, and James, moved to Manhattan in New York City. Lillian was an entertainer and an actress, and I found her photograph in her U.S. passport application. Powell's son, George Robinson, who remained farming in Baker County, was killed by gunshot in 1927. The third African-American professional we will discuss is Adolph Blaylock, who was a farmer and master carpenter. He was born on 3rd October 1915 in Dougherty County to a farmer, Randolph Blaylock. Blaylock developed his interest in building and carpentry early in life. His grandfather, father, 2 uncles, and 3 of his brothers were at one time builders. The 1950 census lists Adolph's occupation as machine operator. According to his 1940 World War II draft registration card, he worked for the Princess Pecan Corporation. The 1950 census lists his occupation as farmer. The 1953 Albany City Directory lists him as a student. He studied carpentry at Georgia Normal School, which is now Albany State University, for 3 years. The 1956 City Directory lists him as an employee. After attending school, he and many other African Americans had difficulty finding work. He even worked with contractors free of charge in order to gain practical experience. In Northwest Library's Genealogy Department, we have a book by William R. Mitchell, Jr. that's called Edward Vason Jones, Architect, Connoisseur, and Collector. The book includes quite a bit of information about Adolph Blaylock as well as photos of him, since Blaylock worked so closely with Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones first hired Mr. Blaylock to help him restore the Vason house in 1949. Blaylock had planned to be a farmer. Jones was very impressed with Blaylock's natural talents. Eventually, Adolph Blaylock's skills as a self-taught master craftsman led Jones to convince Blaylock to become Jones's assistant. Adolph Blaylock directed groups of artisans to carve, shape, and plaster Jones's plans into reality. The Mitchell book also includes an interview with Adolph Blaylock. In the interview in the Mitchell book, Adolph describes the training he received from Mr. Jones. He said it was like going to school with him. In a 1985 interview with the Albany Herald, Blaylock said, "I learned the art of classical building from Mr. Jones. In those days, blacks didn't often have the chance or opportunity to go into classical work, but Mr. Jones said that he could see the potential and quality in my hands. He also said that I was the best craftsman he had ever seen." Edward Vase Jones built the Shackelford House for his friends Hugh and Marie Shackelford from 1949 to 1951. Adolph Blaylock was the foreman and head carpenter, and his brother Ben B. Blaylock was the contractor. From 1949 to 1952, Jones and Blaylock built a Louisiana plantation-style house in Albany for John C. Edmondson. Adolph Blaylock's craftsmanship made the construction of this house possible. The Watt House was Adolph Blaylock's favorite of all his work up to that time because he said, "I built all of it." The house is modeled after the James Semple House of 1780 at Williamsburg, Virginia. The interior's walls and staircases are filled with detailed 18th century woodwork. In 1965, Jones took Blaylock to Washington, D.C. to be project foreman at the renovation of the diplomatic reception rooms on the 8th floor of the Department of State building at Foggy Bottom. The Martha Washington Ladies' Lounge, which is pictured on the slide, was completed by Blaylock and other members of Jones's team after Jones passed away in 1980. You can take a virtual tour of the diplomatic reception rooms online, and I've got the web address there on the slide. It's very worth your time to look at Blaylock's work. The woodwork is just spectacular. Iris Court was built in Albany from 1853 to 18. In 1965, it was going to be torn apart for its materials and replaced by a gas station. Jones's friend Charles Smith had asked him to design a new house for Smith's property in Moultrie. Jones asked Smith to come see Iris Court. Smith purchased the house on the spot. While Jones made detailed drawings and photographs, Blaylock numbered sequentially and cataloged every part of the house so that it could be reassembled in Moultrie. The house was reassembled and modified, with construction complete by 1968. This was one of Jones's favorite projects. In 1968, Blaylock restored rooms at the White House, including the Blue Room. It was returned to its original French Empire style. The White House's Office of the Curator reported that the Blue Room was originally designed by White House architect James Hoban to be the building's most elegant room. The room is one of 3 state parlors designed for use as formal reception areas and diplomatic receiving rooms. The other 2, the red and green rooms, were also renovated by Pat Nixon with the help of Edward Vase Jones and Adolph Blaylock. On May 15, 1972, the President and First Lady hosted a reception to honor the over 800 people who were involved in the renovations of the 3 state parlor rooms. Mrs. Nixon said, "We want the room to be enjoyed by people so that they can really see without interference and also to be proud of their heritage which is represented here." In 1968, the Hollis family bought a farmhouse that was believed to have been built around 1796. The Hollis family hired Jones to restore it, but also wanted to expand it. Jones and Blaylock took 2 other historic houses and incorporated them into the farmhouse. Blaylock supervised the board-by-board dismantling of the houses and their reassembly. In the end, the house looks as though the largest part was built in the 18th century and the other parts added in 1812 and 1820. In 1970, Blaylock and Jones designed and installed 6 exhibition rooms for the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Centennial 19th Century America show. Blaylock was foreman of that project as well. In 1985, Classical America chose Adolph Blaylock as recipient of the Arthur Ross Award for woodwork in the diplomatic reception rooms of the Department of State of the United States, and the Albany Herald ran an article about Blaylock and his award. Classical America is a society founded to encourage the classical tradition in the arts. Blaylock and his wife Jamesina went to New York for the awards banquet, which was held on 13 May 1985 at the National Academy of Design. Adolph said, "Receiving the award was to me the same as receiving a college degree is for students. It's a feeling of accomplishment for oneself and at the same time make others feel good or happy," Blaylock said. "My work has always been somewhat of a challenge. I just had to strive to do the best I could with the knowledge I had acquired. Whenever I have completed something, I always get the feeling that I can do a little better the next time." On April 24, 2018, a historical marker was placed in front of the Shackelford House in Albany. The Georgia Historical Society, National Society of the Colonial Dames of America, and the Albany Dougherty Historic Preservation Commission were all present to honor the legacy of Jones. Adolph Blaylock was also recognized at the ceremony, and 3 of his daughters attended: Geraldine Blaylock Few, Wanda Blaylock Martin, and Gloria Blaylock Daniels. I could not find a marriage record, but the 1940 census shows Adolph Blaylock married to Jamesina White. Together they raised 3 sons and 6 daughters. Blaylock inherited a 106-acre home place and a 243-acre farm from his father's family. Blaylock redesigned and restored the house, and one of my patrons told me that he built a replica of the Oval Office at his house. Adolph Blaylock died on Saturday, 29 January 2005 in Albany, Georgia, and is buried at Crown Hill Cemetery. His wife Jamesina died on 17 March 2017 and is buried beside him. Historian Carter G. Woodson launched Black History Week in 1926 to recognize the significant contributions of African Americans during the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln, which was February 12th, and abolitionist writer Frederick Douglass, which was February 14th. Congress expanded it to National Black History Month 50 years later during the nation's bicentennial celebration, at which time then-President Gerald Ford urged the country to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. The 2025 Black History Month theme, African Americans and Labor, highlights the pivotal role that the hard work of African Americans has played in shaping our country's history. This year's theme also demonstrates how self-help strategies and entrepreneurship in Black communities have provided avenues for economic autonomy and resilience. Deal Jackson, Bartow F. Powell, and Adolph Blaylock are great examples of African Americans who succeeded in unique ways despite the obstacles that made their progress more difficult. Thank you for joining me as we learned more about 3 African Americans whose labor in Dougherty County, Georgia received national attention. Join us next month for information on how to find and research historic newspaper collections. Until then, happy researching!